Good afternoon. I'm Ron Eaglin, President of Morehead State University. I am pleased today to welcome each of you in the audience and those watching on KET Star Channel to this second session of our 7-part symposium on the future of teacher education. I am pleased to announce that we also are planning to televise the next 3 sessions, February 19th, February 26th, and March 26th. We sincerely appreciate the support of KET in the production of these programs. We are grateful to the members of the University Teacher Education Council sponsoring the symposium in an effort to gather information on this vital subject which affects every citizen in our Commonwealth. Morehead State University has been training teachers for 111 years, and we are very proud of our thousands of alumni who are out there in America's classrooms. Our teacher education program has the highest accreditation possible, and we believe our faculty members are doing a good job of preparing tomorrow's teachers. So why are we and the rest of the state and nation talking about reforming our changing teacher education? It is the top of our agenda because we realize that today's teachers are facing very different challenges than those who entered the field just a few years ago. I'm very proud that almost 50 of our faculty members from a variety of academic fields are here again today as part of their commitment to educate themselves on this vital topic. We are seeking information and ideas on the national, state, and local levels because it is important to be able to make informed decisions from the information that we can gather. We are appreciative of those faculty and staff members who are serving on the steering committee for this series of programs. You will meet them as they present your questions during the second half of our session today. At this time, I am pleased to ask Karen Hammonds, Assistant Professor of Education and Chair of the Teacher Education Council, to introduce our very special guest presenters. Karen?
Thank you, President Eaglin. On behalf of the University's Teacher Education Committee, I am pleased today to have the honor of introducing our presenters. Speakers will be the person selected in 1998 as the first president of the Council of Post-Secondary of Education. He came to Kentucky after 20 years as director of the State Council of Higher Education in Virginia. A former visiting professor at the Teachers College of Columbia University, he holds degrees from Yale University and is an authority on the relationship of college and universities to state and local governments. Please welcome between President Eaglin and Dr. Cody, Dr. Gordon Davies. Please stand and let us greet you. He will be followed to this podium by Kentucky's top-ranking public school official, the Commissioner of the Kentucky Department of Education, named in 1995. He came to Kentucky after serving as the state school superintendent in Louisiana, as a local school superintendent in North Carolina, Alabama, and Maryland, as well as a teacher and principal in Alabama. He holds 3 degrees from Harvard University and is chairman of the Council of Chief State School Officers. Please greet Dr. Wilmer Cody. Please stand, let us greet you. Following both presentations, we will entertain questions for our presenters after a short 5-minute break.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting me here to be with you. It's daunting to be introduced as an expert on the relation of colleges and universities to state government. Now, there's there's a field in which no one would claim expertise, I think. I would commend the faculty of Morehead State University and the Teacher Education Council and President Eaglin for his and your wisdom in creating this program and undertaking this endeavor. It is not a sign of weakness to seek change and improvement. It is, in fact, a sign of strength. Many people have observed that America's colleges and universities are changing slower than the society within which we live. Certainly, the pace of education reform in our systems of elementary and secondary education is accelerating, and it's very wise, I think, to undertake a review of why we're doing what we're doing in preparing teachers, and then equally important, in dealing with the in-service needs of teachers as professionals with entire careers in which they need your help as they struggle to remain current and to serve the students who are in their charge. Chancellor Langenberg of the University of Maryland was here last week. He spoke, I thought, most intelligently and persuasively about the situation as he saw it, both in Maryland and from a national perspective. It seems now that the task is to begin to relate this to the state level, to the Kentucky level. And my good friend and colleague Bill Cody will get real particular, I think, about teaching in Kentucky's public schools. Let me begin, however, by saying that it's very important when you set out to solve a problem that you identify the problem correctly and you solve the right problem. The national media have been full of discussions of the under-preparation of teachers throughout the country, and much of the attention seems to have focused on teachers who are not prepared to teach in the disciplines in which they are assigned in secondary schools. As best I can tell, and Bill will speak more to this later, it is not the primary problem here in Kentucky. Most of our secondary school teachers are, in fact, certified in field, and very few teachers teach out of field. That is not true in the middle schools, however. And that's why early on this summer, the commissioner and I created a task force to address questions of math and science content knowledge in teachers in the middle schools. And that math science task force, which consisted of people from the public schools, people from the Department of Education, and I'm sure some of you in the room today, but others throughout the Kentucky system of universities, that is why they have been working, and their report will be coming out sometime in the next several weeks. We look forward to receiving that. I find myself in a rather difficult position as I review the standards for teachers in Kentucky, as I review the demographics, such as I have had access to them, of the teacher force in Kentucky, because frankly, things look pretty good. In the sense that I've read the standards of the Professional Standards Board. They seem very reasonable. All Kentucky public universities, as the president said last week, have accreditation by the accrediting body for teacher education. Several of the private universities have accreditation by that body, and the ones that don't have accreditation on the same standards, but as applied by visiting teams from Kentucky. It's a way of saving some money and going through a review that is as rigorous but a little cheaper. We have one-year mentoring programs for entering school teachers. Seems like a very rigorous entering or mentoring program. And yet somehow this doesn't seem to be enough. Somehow people are still concerned, and as Chancellor Langenberg said last week, what is at the heart of effective teaching, not that other things aren't important, but what is at the heart of effective teaching is the teacher. And what is at the heart of effective learning, therefore, is the adequacy of the preparation and continued education of our teachers. So we have to ask, I think, why that's not enough and what we might do differently. It's not, I emphasize, an exercise in blaming. We're not trying to decide who's responsible for this terrible situation. It's an exercise in change and improvement. And giving simple remedies to this kind of dilemma is actually part of the problem. It was H.L. Mencken who once observed that for every complex problem, there's a simple solution. And he went on to say it's invariably wrong. So we have to be aware of that. I would simply suggest that one thing we might begin to do is to look back at the university itself. Somewhere in the Republic, Plato observes that what a society values, it pays for. Simple truth. What's at the center of a university is what's going to get the most attention. And historically, last 50, 60, 70 years, teacher education has simply not been at the center of the university. I served for a while in another state doing work similar to this. And in a meeting with the president of a major and renowned university, a member of my former council said, what do you think about teacher education? And after a somewhat embarrassing silence, he said, frankly, I don't think about teacher education. And then there was a longer, even more embarrassing silence, as I think you can imagine. But that is an issue. If we're not thinking about it, if it is something that is peripheral, it will not get the attention it deserves. And one of the things that happens, I think, in universities is our students learn a great deal more from what we do than from what we say. So they watch, they learn, and they know what value we put on the preparation and continuing education of teachers. Now, when all the prescribed solutions or measures seem to be working, when there are good standards promulgated by the Professional Standards Board, when everybody's accredited, when everybody has a good mentored experience, when all these things are in place, and yet there's a dissatisfaction with how things are working, one version of the scientific method probably would step back and consider whether the problem has been properly defined, whether we're even beginning to solve the right problem. Gertrude Stein, when she was in her last hours, was in a coma, and she kept saying, what is the answer, what is the answer? She said that throughout the night. And as dawn broke, she suddenly opened her eyes, and she said, what is the question? And then she died. And that's maybe where we should be. We should be asking ourselves what the question is, what it is we want to be asking about the preparation of teachers. Because we in higher education are very good at solving problems and solving the wrong problems. And we solve them very well. I'll give you an example. In the concern about the rising costs of higher education, our leaders in Washington, the associations, tended to insist that it was not a problem with rising costs, it was a problem with public relations. They tried, in other words, to treat it as spin control rather than cost control. It didn't go over very well. It didn't go over very well with the general public, it didn't go over very well with the Congress, and it didn't go over very well with most parents who write checks. We also are prone to reward behavior that we say we don't want. A good example of that was raised last week in this session with a faculty question about enrollment-driven formulae by which money are distributed. Well, we happen not to use those any longer in Kentucky, but when American higher education did use them, and they're not used many places anymore, when American higher education did use them, it encouraged an attitude towards students which put them in a revolving door, and it just rotated them in and out of institutions without much concern for whether they succeeded or not. And it's one of the reasons those enrollment-driven formulae went away. We were encouraging and rewarding a kind of behavior that we said we didn't want. It's important, I think, to understand the historical reasons for this ugly ditch that has existed between higher education and the elementary and secondary schools. We didn't grow higher education out of elementary and secondary education. In fact, after the Second World War, when the tremendous boom in higher education enrollments took place as a result of the GI Bill, only 50% of the high school students graduated high school. So we massified, a European word that would not have much currency in this country. We massified higher education long before we had really massified public schools. So there's always been this gap. The one grew independent of the other, with the exception of the normal school. And in some ways, the normal school was a school in which teaching was at the center of the mission. We've lost a lot of things as time has gone on, as we have gone through the evolution of our educational system in the 20th century. But I have found myself wondering during this last week or so, as I've been thinking about being here today, about the merits of the normal school. I've wondered whether one approach to stimulating another kind of thinking that would attack these problems in different ways, might not be to create the opportunity in Kentucky for something analogous to charter schools. I mean charter schools of education. Now, you know what charter schools are in the public school arena, the elementary and secondary school. But perhaps what we want to do here is to stimulate some new approaches, or maybe just a reversion to the old normal school approaches, but to stimulate some different approaches to the preparation and in-service training of teachers through a competition that would allow 2 or 3 experimental, standalone, affiliated with institutions, but standalone schools of teacher education to be created by Kentucky's colleges and universities, just as places where new things could be tried. Even here, I would fear that that's not enough, because we're talking about the preparation of teachers, and we don't talk enough about the conditions under which teachers work and whether they are indeed professionals. And by most standards, I would submit to you they're not, if we look at other professions. Business, law, medicine. The pay, the professional standing, the ability to be self-regulating, or largely as to their standards of behavior, tend, again, not to reflect the current condition of teachers in our society. And I would remind you of Plato: what we value, we pay for; what we value, we put at the center of our existence. The effort to justify the place of education in what has become the model of the research university, and every institution, every university in the country, including Morehead, is in some manner aware of and reflects the model of the research university. It did lead at a point in our lives to disciplines like law, medicine, and perhaps teacher education becoming too theoretical. Don Schoen, the creator of the notion of reflexive practice, has observed the ways in which these other professions were absorbed into the university, the ways in which they then lost track or touch with the actual practice themselves, and has proposed a kind of model of ways in which we could regain that, not only in these professions, but in the traditional disciplines, which have been fairly slow to adapt. So I would ask, as a question about this university, any university in the United States really, is it possible to change teacher education in any substantive ways in the university as it is now organized? And I don't mean add a course here, add a course there. I'm saying, is it possible to change teacher education in any substantive way in the university as it is now organized? Because I suspect the situation we're in is something like this, that we had 14th century maps of the world, and they didn't have 2 continents on them. In fact, they probably didn't have 3 continents on them. We didn't know about those continents. And then 200 years later, we knew about those continents. And then the question was, could you draw those continents into the existing maps, or did you have to draw the map all over again? Throw the old maps away and draw them anew. And we have several such problems, I think, in not only in Kentucky, although we have them in Kentucky, and we have them with some urgency in Kentucky, where we have to ask this kind of question. We have a system of post-secondary education that enrolls far too few students. Our college-going rate coming out of high school is about 2/3 the national average. Our participation of adults is lower than the national average. Major portions of the population have been left off the developmental map of Kentucky colleges and universities. How many? Perhaps 80,000. Perhaps 80,000 in the next, if we want it to be where Kentucky's legislature and governor have said we want to be in the year 2020, 55,000 in the next 15 years. Can we get there with this organization, this system as it is now organized, or do we have to reconsider the entire system? I won't go on with other examples, but I think there are examples of other ways in which this question applies to the disciplines, organized as they have been traditionally as silos. The question that is much in the newspaper recently about whether we should teach physics first or last, and it was asked of Chancellor Langenberg, and Don said he thought very clearly it should be taught first. And he's a physicist, and he should know. But we don't even have to ask that question, really. We could teach them all at the same time. We could teach them in a problem-oriented way, biology, chemistry, physics. But could we really do that in the university without redrawing the university from scratch? Same question about teacher education. Adrienne Rich, in a poem that is a love poem, writes, "Whatever we do from here is pure invention. The maps they gave us were out of date by years." Are we dealing with a situation in which the map is out of date? It's not a matter of just adding a little continent here and a continent there. We have to draw the maps again. The bad news then is that we're behind, and we have a huge educational deficit, and we have some problems in teacher education. The good news, I think, is that we are extraordinarily open to change. I have found Kentucky extraordinarily open to change. The coastal maps, the maps, for instance, of the state from which I came, are pretty well drawn. They're pretty well fixed. They're pretty inflexible. Our maps have more often been redrawn. We are more part of the interior, where all is in flux. We're a border state in many states, in many ways. We're not as fixed. We still have an element of frontier about us that enables us to take on a challenge like this and to address it perhaps in ways that involve much more substantive change than adding a course here and a course there. Perhaps in ways I would say, let us consider anew what it is we're trying to accomplish, and let us design anew the vehicles that will enable us to do it. I will look forward to your questions. They were extraordinarily rich last week, and I will look forward to hearing yours today. Thank you.
I'm extremely pleased to be here this afternoon and want to promise you that Dr. Davis and I did not swap detailed notes of what we were going to say. And yet, maybe it's because we've spent a lot of time together in the last 3 or 4 months and sort of talked the same language and have some of the same ideas. But you're going to note in my comments that I'm going to pick up on a couple of key ideas that he mentioned. I, too, want to really congratulate the President Eaglin and the faculty of this university for sort of taking this issue seriously and making a commitment to think through the ideas and issues that need to be dealt with and to try to, in effect, help improve the education of boys and girls in this state. I mean, that's been my business for a long time now, and sort of issues come and go, both within my own immediate work, of course. I don't deal with everything all the time. And that's the same true of universities. You can't deal with everything all the time. But I'm extremely pleased and gratified that this university, and in fact universities across Kentucky, have elevated a concern for the quality of teaching in the elementary and secondary schools to a much, much higher level than it's been. As commissioner in Kentucky, my primary responsibility is really provide leadership in the KD resources to improve the effectiveness of schools under the framework of the Kentucky Education Reform Act and under the guidance and leadership of the State Board of Education, and with the advice and consultation. I mean, the sentence goes on. It really is it's something we all work on together, by the way, and probably that's why I feel so positive about what is taking place and what I have no doubt in the future will take place in this state. Of all the places I've worked, there is a more sense of collaboration and sort of common concerns. You know, there's a lot of struggle over defining. It's not only coming up with the solutions, as Gordon said, it's even trying to define the right problems. I mean, I have nightmares about working real hard and coming up with a good idea, and you discover later we've really solved the wrong problem, not the one that we're dealing with. And in fact, that what we dealt with wasn't a problem at all. So this issue of searching for ways of doing things better, whether it is trying to get a more extensive preschool program in Kentucky, or whether it's trying to fix the assessment and accountability, which was a popular term in the last session of the General Assembly, or whether it's probably more fundamental than that. I mean, those things are important and take up, as you can imagine, quite a bit of my time. But Kentucky arguably has the most complex and most ambitious standards-based systemic reform setting policies and laws at the state level in the United States. And it's got so many pieces to it. We call them the strands of Kara. You folks are familiar with that. And not only do we attend together in this state of having to make those pieces work better, meaning we have a clear notion of what it is they're supposed to do, so we're trying to make them work better. I do, and I think increasingly many of you do too, help say, are those the ways we've defined those strands? Is that appropriate? Or what really keeps me awake at night is, have we missed something? I mean, one of the things, for instance, that I think when I came here, looking at the concept of what are the key parts of the education enterprise in K through 12 that link together, that need to be addressed, and high school graduation requirements had not been attended to. Simple question. Are we providing all the high school students in this state an opportunity to learn the things that we say we want teachers to teach them, and we're going to measure on the assessment? The answer was, no, we weren't. You know, I mean, how can we do this without getting together what we're teaching all kids when we've said as a state, as a policy, all children should be taught these things? Solution. Well, we changed the high school graduation requirements. You know, I mean, that wasn't even on the table for several years. By the way, I don't think we've done enough in that arena, but you understand the idea of what else needs to be dealt with in this system. The teacher education issue. I mean, the state, under this kind of notion, we're really asking teachers to do things differently, do things different than they've done before. And we're really asking them to know and understand some things because of what they're being asked to teach than they've had to understand before. And so the continuing of education of teachers has got to be a major piece of this system. And the state, by policy, created an independent professional standards board to, as I say, to worry about the certification of teachers and administrators and approval of university programs, and I think they've done a fine job. I mean, they've had a body that's devoted exclusively to those concerns and issues. I mean, the internship program in the state, in which beginning teachers are guided by not only an experienced teacher in the classroom, but faculty like yourselves, is, I think, the best one in the United States. You know, you who are involved know more about it than I do, so I'm going to quick to say, if we need some improvements, let me know. You know, but in fact, it really is a top-notch program under the jurisdiction of that standards board. And the state also said the continuing education is important. We really need to support that of existing teachers. Let's put money in the budget. It's $15 million. And also let's let most of it be spent on the decisions of what teachers say they want to study. So we have professional development funds, $10 million flows to schools for school councils to develop plans and decide what to do with it, and the other 1/3 goes to school systems. So the issue of the pre-service and in-service training of teachers was not ignored. I started asking questions about this, and you need to know why. I mean, it's really not to do with, I've got to reveal my own biases. I mean, I came out of the doctoral program in the university in administration, and my first job was Director of Teacher Education in Atlanta, Georgia, with appointments with Atlanta City Schools, Emory University, and Atlanta University. I mean, I had 3 titles: Director of Teacher Ed, Assistant Professor, and Instructor, and taught 2 courses. But the job, except for the couple of university courses I taught, was to work with all of those, that school system and those 2 universities and others in the Atlanta area to, through whatever means I could, develop cooperative agreements so that joint teacher education programs involving school-university collaboration came about. You know, so on another time I can tell you the list of new projects that came out of that whole effort. But concern for that was important too. More recently, just before I came here, I was in Louisiana, and I had been state superintendent, but I was really a director of a regional office for something called the National Faculty of the Humanities, Arts, and Sciences, a 25-year-old organization whose primary mission was to bring academic enrichment and renewal to elementary and secondary teachers throughout the United States through the talents of mostly faculty in arts and sciences. So I got a bias. So when I say I started asking these questions, I've got those interests in that area. A couple of side comments. I think this issue that you have in the project and the program that you've embarked on is amazingly timely. I mean, you probably have a sense of doing this because of your own experience here in Kentucky and your own experience. But this question is ascending to a level nationwide that, in my judgment, the quality of teaching and their preparation in continuing education will be the top education agenda item nationwide in the next 10 years. You know, and I have the sort of benefit of being able to look back a number of years about what y'all can see that, about what the major themes were, at least in terms of state policy making and sort of major movements. You know, in the last 10 years, from the state's point of view, it's been standards-based reform. I mean, high standards and expectations and assessments and all the pieces that goes with it. You can almost track back in the 80s and 70s what the sort of the priorities were. In the 60s especially, it was the basic skills movement and with the education of handicapped children. I mean, all of these issues have been addressed more or less. And if the question is, what is it going to demand the attention of a lot of people in education and outside? It's going to be teacher education. I was in a meeting, I guess last week, with the Vice President and several officers of the Education Commission of the States. I mean, this is located in Denver, Colorado. The states belong, the members principally are steering committee members, and there's folks like governors and state commissioners of education and legislators are on this group. And we were talking about teacher education, and what those staff members shared with me, she said they were amazed at the number of governors across the country that have added teacher education to their agendas. And by the way, that's almost like a bellwether. You find out what they're interested in, you can guarantee it's going to be a major issue nationwide. So the good news is we're not alone in this. I mean, in fact, is one of the important things for all of us to do is not only turn together to each other, but also look outside and see what's going on. I mean, this is a major national effort. I've just been to the first meeting and been invited to be on the Task Force on Teacher Education. It is a creation of the American Council on Education, and it's called the President's Task Force, meaning university presidents. In that organization, a very high standing in this country, the presidents of that are part of that organization have said we want a task force on improving teacher education in America. So, timely topic, a lot to learn from other places where things are going on. When I came here, in addition to spending 110% of the time on assessment accountability and a few other things, I started asking the questions about this whole teacher education dimension, the Standards Board notion and things they're working on, and in-service education, and really one of the first questions was what do we know about and what's the quality of beginning teachers who prepared to teach in Kentucky? And I don't even remember the exact conversation now. I remember someone saying, well, we don't have much data and information on that. I said, why don't we go ask them? And so 3 years ago, we commissioned a study through the Kentucky Institute of Education Research, a survey of a sampling of beginning teachers in Kentucky, actually first, second, third-year teachers, asking them, telephone interviews, a whole series of questions on what do they think about their pre-service training. You know, we can debate later about whether that's a good way to get data and information or not. I happen to think it's not the only source, and if we never should depend on that totally, but it's fairly legitimate to ask the folks that are on the job to reflect on their training on a series of dimensions. And we issued that report. And the good news is teachers who get their jobs to begin in Kentucky are very, very complimentary about their pre-service training in this state. The general teacher education, they really rate it very high. The sort of set of questions dealt with the new, what I would call the new teaching standards developed by the Standards Board over the last few years, and there's a set of questions dealing with that. And in terms of the teachers' response to a series of questions dealing with those dimensions, the ratings were also very high. I mean, I think the universities get good marks from teachers in terms of their general perception of their preparation, and specifically their preparation on the new teaching standards, which, by the way, are framed not as totally new. I mean, they're part of the kind of what I would call the kinds of things that universities, and we've all tried to do for many years, is just they're stated in probably better ways in performance terms. And then there was a whole series of questions that were framed in terms of the specifics that are related and somewhat unique to teaching in Kentucky, like working with writing portfolios, understanding the state assessment system, curious, participating in school-based decision-making, use of technology in the instructional program. And that report said, we got a long way to go in that, folks. In other words, there was a lot of areas in which the teachers were very, very high on their preparation. But there's some things that are very special and important in this state in which, well, for instance, in the technology area, 18% of the teachers in the state said they felt well prepared. Well, let me talk a minute about what do you do about that? I mean, just that bit of information. You know, I mean, one is to say, my gosh, I mean, I could say, you folks ought to do a better job in that. And I say, now, wait a minute. We have a common interest in not only teachers who, once they're hired, learning more, but before they're hired. It is, I believe, a circumstance that the expectations for teachers in Kentucky to be able to use technology have changed very rapidly over the last 4 or 5 years. And we have a lot of equipment in schools. Okay? And by the way, the state has spent $300 million over the last 8 years. We're going to spend $300 million more over the next 2 years. So the nature and the importance of this is part of a job. Rather than point fingers, why don't we get together? Why don't we get together in which the schools in Kentucky and the universities of Kentucky join hands of how we can help prepare teachers better before they actually go in the classroom. I mean, keep that theme, set it aside for a minute because I'm going to come back to it. The second part of search for how well teachers are doing, you know, these things, you need to know how this works, by the way. I mean, this is what I call, I got a sort of background subliminal concern, and something will happen that will trigger a question. And I saw a report from the Southern Region Education Board that said the standards for the National Teacher Examination cutoff scores in Kentucky were among the lowest in the Southeast. And so I've asked the staff members and said, we don't use NTE anymore, we use practice. And I said, what are the cutoff scores for practice? And they said, I don't know, we'll go find out. I mean, literally, that's how this stuff evolves. So I get a report a month later that lists all the different areas of teaching. What it had on the column to list, what are the national medians, I think. Yeah, medians. What are the national medians of those who take each of these tests, whether it's elementary, whether it's physics, whether it's French or whatever. What is the national median in Kentucky? What is the cutoff score in Kentucky for each of these tests? And what percent of Kentucky teachers who take the test pass the cutoff score? Okay. Interesting information. I don't know whether that information's been circulated. It's around somewhere, and I assume some faculty members have seen it. Anybody related to the Standards Board has too. By the way, these are standards on a new praxis test that were set in a legitimate, honest way under the advice of the guidance of the Educational Testing Service, in which people were brought together to look at test questions and level of difficulty and decide, in effect, how much people needed to know, to be certified, with no reference to and no knowledge at that point in time of the performance of people nationwide, because there was no such data. I mean, this is one of the difficulties of standard setting. In Kentucky, the cutoff score for elementary certification is at the 3 percentile. You just have to be better than the lowest 3% of the folks nationwide. Most of them range around 10, some of them around 20. Math is about 50, by the way. Mostly the teachers in Kentucky's median is pretty close to the same as the national median. Our elementary certified teachers perform on this test the same. The average in Kentucky, the median in Kentucky, is the same as the national median for elementary certified teachers. It's just that everybody can pass it, that's what it amounts to. Physics is an interesting situation. And I forgot, I didn't bring the exact numbers with me, but the national median of those who are majoring in physics and in the physics content test is, I don't know, something like 165. Must be a 200-point scale. They differ in terms of scales. The Kentucky median is 170s, 1 or 2, something like that. We're doing better. The cutoff score is 177. We had 13 physics education majors who passed the test last year out of 23 who took it, I think. I mean, I don't know how many physics education majors you have here, but statewide we don't have many. I asked one a professor at another university, what's the impact of this? He says, well, the students know it, so they don't major in physics education. The Standards Board, by the way, it already has a project underway to try to rationalize those things, and I don't know, there's no right answer to this stuff, but to try to rationalize it. I mean, I don't know whether, maybe you rationalize it, do I want my child in a classroom with somebody who scores in the bottom 3% nationwide? Probably not. But we've got physics so high, who's teaching physics in the state? You know, these are issues that have to be struggled through. And there are groups working on that right now, and I'm optimistic that they'll come out with something that's better than what we've got right now. Admission standards of teacher education program. And I just asked the question, what are they? Do they exist? I didn't even know that at first. And then what are they? You know, and what I found I think it's an exciting thing that all universities have sort of set admission standards of who's admitted to the teacher education programs. This university has already been discussing it, and I think you've already made some decisions about next year. You know, and so I sort of set that aside. That seems to be in pretty good shape. I'm not trying to defend all these particular measures, by the way, including the praxis. It's better than the old NTE, but I think we probably need to do better than that in terms of a kind of measure. But in this search for information, really to avoid what I call policy by anecdote, at one point in time, I think all anecdotes are true from the perception of the person who tells it. And very, very few of them generalize to everything. They make nice stories, by the way. But and any folks in the General Assembly, John Will, you know this. I mean, we've got anecdotes all the time, but whether or not they represent sort of reality in a broad scale, we never quite know. So it's sort of gathering information. It's trying to figure out what questions to ask, and then gathering information to see whether or not there's anything there of significance to tell us that we can do anything different or better than what we're doing. Another set of things started on the puzzle over looking at test results in Kentucky and realizing that on our measures we were using, elementary schools were charging ahead, especially in reading and mathematics. High schools were doing pretty good, and middle schools seemed to be sort of chugging along somewhat slowly. And, you know, what is this all about? I mean, is this something? I remember reading, I've been in several meetings with middle school folks, and invariably somebody within the first 5 minutes says, well, you know what, middle school children are different. And I've gotten so to say, you mean they can't learn science? Which is a nice repartee type thing, but it doesn't really get at the issue. What is going on here? For a while I had folks saying, well, middle school is a time for exploration, and so we're really not focusing on the academics. I'm not sure that's a useful, but at some point in time I said, why don't we find out what teachers know? And so do the teachers in the disciplines of middle school really know their subject matter? We're asking them to teach in a more rigorous form than we ever have before. We're expecting more of them. We're expecting them to know more of the discipline than was called for in an earlier era. Do they have a major or a minor in the field? And we could have gotten this simpler by asking for certification information, but decided to do it the hard way. And the staff member working on this said, well, you know, that data only exists in terms of major or minor, in terms of specifically what people have taken in transcripts. And I said, fine, do a scan of the transcript data. Well, it's not on a data file. I said, well, how do you get it? Well, we go into the files and pull the transcripts and count courses. We quickly decided not to do all subjects, but just do mathematics, you know, and learn with literally hand counting that about a third of the teachers of middle school mathematics in this state had neither a major nor a minor in the field. And I think we can assume that's true of science and social studies and English. What it in effect is the grades 1 through 8 elementary certificate. Those who had them in 1990 and 91 were grandfathered. They met the rules. So middle school teachers are certified. But we've got by the way, that's a large cadre of people, by the way. Well, it's about 4 times 3 is 12,000 per, 4,000 per grade level times 3 is 12,000 and a third of them. So it's about 4,000 people is what we're talking about. Met with a group of them. I mean, I was interested in what the teacher's perception of this situation was, and asked for a group of middle school math teachers with elementary certificates be pulled together and just give them the facts and ask them what's their experience. And I had several, and these, by the way, now I'm shifting into anecdotes, not data. And I remember some of the observations that help perhaps understand the frustrations and the perception of teachers in those circumstances. One of them said, "Well, it's a problem because the teachers who do have a major or minor in their field or a certificate in the discipline, or one of the new middle school certificates. I mean, all certificates since then require 2 areas, I think, in the subject matter. They get to teach what they're trained in, and I get to teach whatever's left." I mean, this was a teacher's expression. 2, I don't have the certificate in the major or the minor, but I love math, and I've been teaching it 15 years, and I really do understand advanced mathematics, and I want to teach algebra, but I can't teach the high school for credit algebra at the 8th grade because I don't have the certificate, and is there some way I can do that? 2, a teacher who said, I get assigned math, and I just plead with my principal not to assign me this pre-algebra course because I just don't understand that stuff. 2, a young man who said, I got my degree to begin teaching in 1989 and was offered a job in the middle school and was asked to teach mathematics, and I knew I needed more mathematics and went to a university, and they said, well, certainly, we've got courses we can teach you, but you have no prerequisites, so you'll have to take undergraduate courses. And that's rational. I mean, that seemed reasonable. But he said, if I take a master's degree in elementary teaching, I get credit on a salary schedule. And I have a family, and young children are coming along. And so he proceeded to get a master's degree in elementary education, and I think he's either finished or working for a AA in guidance and counseling, and still haven't studied any more math, and he's still teaching mathematics. Well, you get all these stories together. And the point I want to make is that even through anecdotes, we can see the interconnected with so many pieces of this thing. It's not just the training program, it's the employment, it's the incentives and disincentives for further study, much of which come from the schools, not from the universities. And I'm going to go back to something Gordon said, this is a complex business. And one of the things as we work on this together, we've got to be sure we try to look at all the sides and dimensions, and we don't fix the wrong thing, or what we think is a fix doesn't do any good. $50 million a year is being allocated to schools and school districts for continuing education, continuing professional development. Simple question: what's it going for? And by the way, that sounds like a simple question, and I'm coming back to the same theme. The information, the data that's readily accessible to answer that's driving me crazy, and I'm driving my staff crazy because I ask a question that seems simple and it sends them off on a course of a month-long journey of trying to create new data sets and information. But this one, the answer had to come out of a content analysis of professional development plans. We probably could have surveyed everybody, but I don't know about you folks, but we get worried about wearing teachers out by asking too many surveys. So we had on files the professional development plans of schools and districts, and literally coded what they said they were doing by classification and counted frequency with which things are attended to. I don't think it was an hour measure, it just was a topic subject measure. Curriculum alignment. Aligning lesson plans to academic core contents is the top agenda from teachers. Second, by the way, is technology. Third is classroom management, how to handle discipline problems. And then there were a few other sprinkle of things. Those are the same. All these are important. You know, there's nothing. What was interesting in, we couldn't find any evidence except in two places in the teaching of writing could we find anything being addressed to academic core content, to the academic studies, of what I would call academic enrichment. Teachers wanting to study more about the ideas and issues of the discipline. Non-existent. I told you I'd come at this from a bias, you know. And so, and by the way, I don't want to treat this too casually, not only a bias, the stuff that I've been reading nationwide about what makes a difference in terms of the effectiveness of a teacher. If there are any historians in the audience, I mean, I'm sort of I'm going to draw upon another piece that it's not coming from research, which is fairly sound data that says the more teachers know about the subject in which they're teaching, the more effective they are and the better, more kids learn. And that seems to be self-evident, but somehow we needed to prove this through research. And that's coming out of data. More interesting, an equally interesting anecdote from an article in the last week's Education Week by a college president who used to be a history professor, who just recounted the time when he was a professor. He did an analysis. He did a review and analysis of a large number of autobiographies, a large number of important autobiographies of significant citizens who said something about teachers they'd had. And he just read it to see what it is they said about memorable teachers. Almost uniformly, everybody said the teacher was memorable because he or she really knew their subject matter well. And the second one, not surprising, is, in effect, I knew they cared about me. And the third one, by the way, was something really memorable, meaning they knew their subject matter well, or they really cared about me, or they had overcome some handicap, or had bright red hair, or something that was just, you know, recognizable and memorable. But that idea of a teacher being excited about the content and the subject they're teaching is clearly one of those characteristics. How do we, by the way, there is one of the things that I thought was really positive, looking at this state requires master's degrees. You have to get a master's degree within 5 years, I think, of beginning teaching. And a lot of current middle school teachers and who've been hired in the last 10 years, and high school teachers take their Master of Education degree, and a lot of them are Master of Arts within the Arts and Sciences. I asked someone, just give me a description of the master's degree programs in education that most people are taking. And you'd be interested, almost all of them, and I think including this university, for middle school and high school teachers, the MAD is a joint venture between Arts and Sciences and the Education Department. It varies in terms of proportion and how much, you know. So there was a sign of those who are continuing to work, at least some of them getting these kinds of degrees, are staying connected. The term I use is staying connected with the ideas and issues of their discipline. But most of the professional development, continuing education, is content-free, if I may misuse a term in a different, you know. And if is that a real problem? I still think that has yet to be answered. But if it is, how do we deal with that? How do we encourage teachers to, and how do we support? Maybe we don't have to encourage. Maybe they'd love to do it anyway. This group of math teachers all said they really wanted to study more mathematics. So maybe there's a motivation there. Maybe we just need incentives and encouragement and get some of the barriers out of the way so that teachers can stay connected and continue to be excited about the ideas and issues of their disciplines. Leadership. Ever since I've been here, we've got a superintendent shortage in this state. I mean, this is what I hear from a lot of folks. Not many people were candidates. And if you hear that and believe it, what you would do is go out and create a whole bunch more, get a whole lot more people getting superintendent certificates. There are 38,000 teachers in Kentucky. And I assume that includes, I'm not sure that includes administrators. I'm drawing a blank. If it does include administrators, add another 4,000 or 5,000 to that, I guess. Is that about right? Yeah. On the list of those who were certified, excuse me, that's how many employed. On the list within the Standards Board of how many people have certificates, some of whom are employed and some of whom are not somewhere else, there are 3,800 people who have a certificate, and generally they're administrative, principal, superintendent certificate. Where's the shortage? You know, I mean, do we need to rush out and get a bunch more people in? Or is it something else about this, the schools, or who gets into programs, or the nature of the job that nobody wants it? I don't even know the answer to that yet. But if we're looking at the preparation of leadership and the development of leadership in the state, we better be careful to look at all sides of it before we too quickly say, my gosh, we don't have enough, let's go get more. Let me give you another example of that. The Standards Board, in part, not totally, but in part due to a plea from local school systems that we have a principal shortage. And in this state, one of the difficulties and barriers is you have to get a rank 1 certificate to be a principal. And other states around us don't require that. And let's keep the same standards, but let's drop it to the master's degree level. And that's been done over the last couple of years. I should say while I wasn't looking. That's Monday morning quarterbacking stuff. It means I wasn't paying attention is probably a better way to describe it. I asked about how many people are certified for the principalship in this state. There are 4,582 current employees who have the principal certificate. 70% of them are in some kind of administrative supervisory job. 30% are not. It's an interesting fact. I don't even know what that means. Is that enough, or is that too many? I mean, I don't even know how many you need to have a pool to draw from. What I do know is that last year there were 337 new certificates issued to people that, quote, went into the pool, so to speak, and 199 appointments made of beginning principals or assistant principals. And another, what I call a throwaway statistics, there's another list I got that counted and showed, by the way, in addition to those who are now working in Kentucky who have principal certificate, there's another 5,000 plus who don't work in Kentucky. And you always wonder about numbers. Where are they? Are they in Indiana? Are they retired? Or like the election rolls, are they in the cemetery? I don't know where these folks are. And some of this you can have fun with, by the way. But the whole notion of getting the numbers, at least the numbers clear, is extremely important. Well, I won't go through a whole series of other, what I call my inquiries of trying to get a better understanding of, as Gordon said, and I'm repeating, what's the question? And then how do we get useful, reliable data and information to help us better understand the nature of the problems? But it's led me to conclude that there's a category of things we need to look at closely. And one of them is under the heading of raising standards for who become teachers in this state. And you've heard about, or some of you have seen, a paper I put out in November, and what I call it to move the discussion forward, to sort of stimulate discussion. And I have gotten a lot of positive response. I've also got some people who are really offended by some of those ideas, but it certainly has got some attention anyway. And that was the purpose of it. But out of this, as we work together, I would urge us to pay attention to several things about raising standards for who become teachers in this state. And number two, because this is a dynamic system, the higher we raise standards, the lower we're going to generate it, we're going to have an effect on supply, so we better at the same time make becoming a teacher more attractive than it is. So we balance those things off. Jobs do get filled, folks, with somebody. That's what's happening nationwide because of so many people in other states who are being hired with emergency certificates. We can raise standards. I mean, what's the other option? Keep standards low because we've got to have enough? That's not in the interest of children. But we have to attend to both sides of it. So the second one is making teaching more attractive, and I won't go into the specifics, but there's some suggestions in that document. Number 3 is addressing the middle school issue with these 4,000 people who have done everything they've been asked. They have gotten their certificates. They worked hard. These all have 10 or more years experience, by the way. These are not beginners. They're our folks. And we need to together to figure out a way that we can help them get what they tell me they would like and remove some of these barriers and disincentives and provide encouragement and support. And by the way, support. And it's almost like they're our employees. If they need to be taught something differently, we just need to pay for it. You hear that, John Will? One of your legislators is down front, so that's the third area. The fourth area is I think, and I would frame it this way, that the continuing education of all teachers needs to have a substantial portion of it devoted to academic enrichment. And this is not just the middle school issue, it's everybody's. So that teachers stay connected with the ideas and the issues of the disciplines. Science does not, we don't create jobs to allow that in elementary and secondary. I mean, you got to be there when school opens, you got to teach kids all day long, you got to grade papers at night. You may go on Thursday night or Saturday morning to a class, and most of them tell me, but they would rather do it during the summertime. And they just, we don't structure the job that way. So we've got to figure out some way to make the continuing education not only easier and more accessible to teachers, but a part of it deals with the academic enrichment. And then the fifth area is how can we foster leadership and leadership development. I'd close with 3 points. That one, I don't think we can, any of us, do this alone. I was pleased to learn early before the meeting that the work going on here with this kind of meeting and subsequent ones will lead to and I don't know the title, Ron, but it's a group of you with some other people from other universities who are going to work together to come up with an agenda of what you can do in your institutions. But after those discussions, we'll have ideas that may have bearing on what the Council on Post-Secondary Education does, what the State Department of Education does, what the Standards Board does, and I welcome that. What I call, we've all together, we all got to work on it. We need to work on it together. We need to keep this broad, it's what I call system point of view, and not limit ourselves only to the consideration of what our institutions can do. That we work hard together of really trying to figure out what the right questions are. And don't be too quick to assume we know. I don't. I mean, I don't think any of us do. So we get, let's work together on trying to be sure we get the right problems defined. And then as we do that, we work together on data and information and understanding and from many sources, so that we have what I call a reliable, accurate description of the current condition of any of these problems that we're talking about, and to the extent possible, not make policy on anecdote. Thank you very much, folks.
We are going to take a 5-minute recess. I think that those folks out in our television audience will have a sign that comes up and says that. And is that happening right now? Or am I just waving at people out in they are not here anymore? Okay, now, just this group. We would like for you to fill out any questions that you have. I think there's a tremendous amount of data. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to our symposium. This is a time where we have the opportunity for our distinguished panelists to answer questions from our audience. I will remind those of you who have questions, if you could fill out the cards and pass them to the aisles and then forward, and we're going to try to cover as many questions as we can. I have the honor of asking the first question, and it will be the last question that I ask because it's important for each of you to have an opportunity. Last week we heard from Chancellor Langenberg about the P through 16 initiative, and I would like to ask each one of our distinguished guests if they might comment about that concept and what that might mean and potentially for Kentucky.
Well, why don't I start? Don Langenberg's suggestion was that states consider ways in which the bodies responsible for elementary, secondary, and higher education could come together to work on issues of mutual concern. Speaking for me, but I think Bill agrees, we are very aware of what we call the seam issues, the issues between the systems, and we have had several discussions about developing a mechanism for dealing with those issues. There are issues like high school graduation requirements, entrance requirements, teacher certification requirements, teacher education program approval, and we know that those are critical issues. One of the things that we have been able to accomplish in a short period of time is that our two boards have agreed to meet together in April of this year in what I am told is a rare occurrence. That's too bad. Now we need to make this opportunity one in which we don't just do show and tell, but we can engage each other in serious and substantive decision making.
Yeah, Gordon earlier mentioned that we already had underway between our two agencies a task force on middle school science and math, to deal with some of the things that I had mentioned earlier, and he had mentioned too. That's probably a good example of interagency collaboration, and the idea that at the boards level, that these junctures where we have common interests, where we do come together, that we very, very consciously decide to work on those. And so the agenda for that meeting that we are recommending be not the only agenda, but primary agenda for these two boards that have not met, in my recollection, and or none of my staff's recollections, in addition to introducing each other to them and them getting to know each other, is to identify those seam issues, like admissions requirements. I mean, I'm on a committee dealing with admissions requirements, but like the remediation problem. Boy, that's one to define. But a whole series of those that they really become under the leadership and guidance of both boards in some structure. Perhaps a P16 council made up of members of both boards. That from the policy level, they guide what are the most important seam issues for us to be working on together. And then we use that as the agenda for how we move forward. Mm-hmm. But I'm very optimistic about that, and I think it's something that both boards are going to find something that they'll get excited about. So I think we don't, there's none of the details worked out yet, but I think we're going in a positive direction, and I think my guess is within a fair short time, in several months, we'll be able to describe the P16 initiative in Kentucky. Too early to do that yet, but pretty close to it.
This is directed to Dr. Davies in particular, and this was my lunch conversation with a colleague question. Oh. With regard to faculty tenure and promotion, professional development partnership initiatives with local school districts are not rewarded in higher ed circles. Mm-hmm. What suggestions do you have for these challenges to be met?
The question, if I understand you, is that in candidacy for tenure, things like involvement in public schools through professional development and such are not rewarded. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they're very time-consuming, and it makes it very difficult to carry on what we might call
And then
traditional.
somebody says to you, but you haven't done your research.
We haven't done our research. You're in the right ballpark, yes.
I'm in the right ballpark, right. I'll bet I am. I'll bet I am. And I think that that the suggestions made now some years ago by the late Ernie Boyer and Gene Rice were absolutely right. We have for years in American higher education labored under a too narrow definition of scholarship. And there are ways in which we can expand that conception. I'd even go beyond that, however. I think teaching is undervalued in tenure decisions in many universities. I'm not prepared to say that about any university in Kentucky. I don't know them well enough. But in many universities, teaching is not sufficiently valued in tenure decisions. And the other area that is coming to interest me greatly, civic engagement is not sufficiently honored in tenure decisions. I think that's a matter, obviously, for individual universities to deal with because the Council on Post-Secondary Education has no voice in tenure, but it is a challenge that I would be happy to see the universities take up.
I just received a note that if you have questions, please pass them to your right and then up. Some of you are still holding your questions.
I thought that might have been a threatening note about tenure.
P.S. Dr. Davies, don't meddle in tenure decisions.
You have just been exposed to anthrax.
Or why to the right? Why not to the left?
Yeah.
My name is Donna Everett, and I represent the College of Business on the screening committee. I have a question for both of you.
Mm-hmm.
Assuming that the task force reports of both the Pritchard Committee and that of the governor will contain many similar recommendations, what do you predict the differences will be?
May I comment on that?
Yeah,
Do I get a
please.
chance to ask you to rephrase the question so I can have time to think up an answer?
Like I did. Right?
I want to be sure I understand it accurately. I don't think I don't see those as parallel entities. In fact, it's one of the reasons I was so pleased that the governor and the legislative leadership would create such a task force is one, at least from my point of view and my brief experience here and in other places, fundamental things are only come about when the House and the Senate and the governor's office get together. So, I mean, this elevates it to a high level. Number two, there are a lot of different ideas that are surfacing. I mean, I got my list of 21 points or 19, depending on which day you ask me. And the Pritchard Committee has got some ideas that are very seriously thought out. I mean, they're part of a project that we encouraged that tied to Kentucky to Linda Darling Hammond's program. I call it hers because she's a friend of mine, but it's the
Effective schools.
no, it's Teachers for the 21st Century. I can't remember the title of it. And they're part of that network. So there's some good ideas, but the efforts of this faculty here, working with faculty in terms of the formal plan that's going to take place over the next several months, will come up with some ideas, some of which have to do with what the universities can carry out, and some of which are going to be suggestions, I'm sure, to me, and what the State Department of Education can do. Now, having said all that, most of the ideas that are being talked about really are kinds of things that can be done by faculty decisions or executive decisions in Department of Education, but some of them may have legislative bearing. So what I expect to happen is that the Pritchard Committee's ideas, Morehead University's ideas, and some others that have legislative significance. And by the way, anything that costs money has legislative significance. And the Council on Post-Secondary Education all will feed into that task force. the question got framed as if these are two different bodies, how they're going to be different. In the final analysis, the key ones are the ones that come out of the task force. That's what it amounts to. And they will become the audience or the forum for all of us. That's what it amounts to.
No.
And I'm representing the College of Education and Behavioral Sciences, and I'm on the steering committee. The question, I guess, is directed mostly to Dr. Davies, that in 1991, when CARA was initiated, there was a lot of money that was funneled into professional development. Is there a plan to do something similar for higher education?
For higher education? Good question. The place where we are putting most of our attention right now about professional development has to do with the Commonwealth Virtual University, where we know that we can't ask faculty to undertake new ventures into distance learning without adequate preparation. Personally, I see the Commonwealth University as having two purposes. The one, it will expand access and service to the people of Kentucky. But the second is I see it as being a catalyst for change within all of the universities. So if we can build a good, viable program of professional development around the virtual university, I would see it beginning to influence everything in faculty life.
May I add a comment to that? Because my answer is not going to be of the scope of what was done when CARA came about, nor the $15 million. But there's some things that have happened recently in other conversations with folks in the higher education. We have a Kentucky Leadership Academy that's been in existence for, it's a 2-year program, very and fairly intensive, and it's modeled after the training distinguished educators got. Okay, I mean that's the general notion. It's not exactly that, but it's close to it. And I was in another setting in which someone asked, would it be possible for some folks in higher education, particularly those in administration programs, to be part of the Kentucky Leadership Academy? Because I had described it, and I said, by the way, we don't pay for it. The local school system do. It costs $1,500 per year per person. And a university professor said, well, I'd like to, but we don't have that kind of money within our schools. I said, you need some scholarships, don't you? He said, yeah. I said, all right, how about 4 or 5? I mean, we had this quick of a conversation. Then I went back and told my staff to send out an invitation to universities to invite folks to the Kentucky Leadership Academy. It's a small thing, but it's an important one. Now, having said that, we're in the business of forming a number of Kentucky Teachers Academy, which are academic-based teacher training programs. Some are institutes, sort of long-term, 2 and 3 years. And from my point of view, a definition of a teacher academy has both elementary or secondary or high school teachers and university faculty in it.
Thank you. I'm a recipient of one of your scholarships, and one of the other recipients is here in the audience, and we thank you for those scholarships.
Well, I didn't mean, I was sort of joking about scholarship. Essentially, there's no charge to the university.
They were out of his pocket. He's being unduly modest.
But there's a real barrier. I mean, there's not, $1,500 is a nice piece of change, but it's in everybody's interest that there be some university folks involved in this, so.
I'm Dr. Thomas Klein, and I'm a member of the steering committee representing the College of Science and Technology. And this question is for both Dr. Cody and Dr. Davies. And it is, while universities address accountability regarding program folio design, there must be alignment since expectations need to be based on standards. So the question is, what plans are in place to ensure that expectations are aligned not only by individual university, but also from one university to another, for example, in transfer credits?
I'm sorry, I think I understand that last. I think the only thing I understand in that question is what are we doing with transfer credits, but I don't understand the whole rest of the question.
Are you referring to teacher preparation specifically?
Yeah.
How do we know?
I think in general, the question is referring to some sort of level of consistency among all the institutions within the state in regard to their teacher preparation, as opposed to a lot of variance between different programs.
Who wrote the question?
Well,
The author?
Let me, can I don't, I mean, at the risk of not understanding, I got a real good answer.
Well,
by
we're
the way,
real
so
good
why
at
don't I-
answering questions. I mean, we are real good at answering questions we don't understand. We're as good at that as solving problems that don't exist.
Rephrase it the way you want to hear it.
Yeah, boy, rephrases the way I wanted to be asked, so I can answer anything. No, I think there is thinking going on that's important, that I think is probably triggered by the thinking of that, although I hadn't thought about it in terms of consistency. I mean, the standards right now are admission standards to teacher education programs, content of courses defined by what's offered, exit tests like the praxis, internship, which is on the job, and all that's part of the initial certification. The big change that's coming down the track, not only in Kentucky and elsewhere, is that we shift for certification based on not in terms of credits earned, but evidence of what teachers know and can do, performance assessment, and that is not. Boy, that's easy to say, isn't it? It is not easy, I don't think, to bring about. But Kentucky and 2 other states, I think Indiana and Maryland, really are way ahead of the rest of the country in essentially describing what teachers need to know and be able to do to be effective teachers in a performance sense. In other words, describe the performances in which how teachers demonstrate that. The next step is setting benchmarking standards. What evidence it essentially testifies to how well they know these things. And that's a process that is now under active discussion by the Standards Board, and will probably, in fact, we will probably jointly, the Department of Education and Standards Board, submit a proposal to the federal government for Title II funds, Title II and higher education, to do several things, one of which is to benchmark the performance standards. Now, having said that, and while we're probably another year or 2 down the track, the step beyond that is possibly the creation of assessment centers to measure or assess the competence of beginning teachers, meaning it all goes on a demonstrated performance basis rather than hours courses collected. Is that something brand new? Well, no. The National Board Certification for Teachers takes the development of a portfolio and to include a videotape and have to sit for a very, very lengthy examination, and it costs $2,000, by the way. I mean, that's, these are not minor tests. The new, what it's referred to as a performance assessment for the principal certification is a very lengthy sit for the examination, and it costs $500. That's a long way from a $75 pencil and paper test you take in 2 hours. So the whole notion of evaluating and assessing the preparation of teachers, their readiness to teach, I should say, is about to move in a very, very significant direction. And I think that will, when that happens, we won't just have the praxis. It's really the only external measure, external to the universities themselves. It's like a class grades or whether or not you take a national test, that kind of thing. We'll have something that's statewide.
Let me add something, whether it's on the subject or not, I hope it is. I don't want this council, and I certainly don't want the Board of Education involved in prescribing either the curricula or the organization of teacher education programs in Kentucky. I'll give you a very simple reason why. When we in Virginia redefined teacher education, the University of Virginia looked at the requirements and said, we have to do this in a 5th year. So we need a major, and then the 5th year we will do the professional training of prospective teachers. The College of William and Mary, which is an equally prestigious institution, said we don't have to do that. We can do it in 4. They're both doing it their way, and they're both doing it very well. I think the institutions need the ability to design their curricula without being intruded upon. And what I like in the way Bill is describing this is we just agree upon some standards. Now, the second thing I do also like is this notion of looking at competence along the lines of a recital in the fine and performing arts. I know an engineering program that is now designed with a series of recitals. Engineers performing at certain levels to earn an engineering degree, and it has an experimental accreditation from the accrediting body. Think about demonstrating competence as a teacher along the line of doing a set of performance recitals in piano at different stages of one's career as a performer in the Juilliard School. There's no reason why we can't move to those kinds of things.
But how one learns piano needs to be decided by each institution.
That's exactly right.
I think these are both great answers. I think I understand the question.
You understood it well, then you can't answer. Because you may embarrass both of us.
I find that hard to believe. I think what was being asked in that question is that we have in our state, rightfully so, a concern about the efficiency of students moving through the educational system and through the post-secondary system. And I think what the question was leaning itself towards, and I think it offers great opportunity for us, that we will find pockets of issues in places where institutions transfer students to us who then go on into teacher education. And then we find at the end of the line there were some things lacking in preparation that shows up in examination that then we get blamed for and we didn't do.
Okay, you took a student who transferred to you. The student comes out of Morehead and does not do well on examination, and the fault accrues to Morehead.
And I see that as, and if that is what the question is, I see it as a great opportunity for us to work with those institutions in terms of our own feedback to help them. And I think I take the analogy a little farther. If we're sending master's or doctorate programs down to the University of Kentucky and they are finding certain problems within our curriculum, hopefully we have an open enough of a system, and I think this is what P through 16 will allow, that we don't get defensive about that, but we use that as an opportunity to fix something that may be easily fixed in terms of curriculum and our opportunities.
The formation of the Kentucky Community and Technical College system gives us a tremendous opportunity to do this much more effectively, if that is the issue, with a full-blown community college system in Virginia. Every one of our universities that received transfers from that set of schools sent a report back to every school about how well its students were doing. When you begin working very closely together, the community college that is across the highway from the University of Virginia transferred students to the University of Virginia who did better after 2 more years than the students who started as natives at the University of Virginia. When you work that out, and you work it out carefully. Sorry, yeah. Who's next?
Hi, I'm Stephanie Fiala, and I'm from the College of Humanities, and I'm on the steering committee. And this is a question from the audience, and it's directed to either one of you. And given a 30-year career, should there be more formal opportunity for certificate advancement than our rank 2 and rank 1? And there's a second part. And in your mind, is our current system of advancement rank sensible and useful?
I'm going to defer to
You're
you.
going to defer that
seems to me. I have opinions, but they are not colored by knowledge. So
I do too, so we can, no. I think that if I could define what the objective needs to be, from my point of view, is that the education of the professional, it's got to be a lifelong project. Excuse me, a career long, okay? Lifelong's okay too, but career long anyway, for 30 years. One. And two, systems that and requirements that are incentives that are set up to say you get to a point you're finished, you don't have to do it anymore. There's something inherently flawed with that. So I think there's limiting what we have now, which is a master's degree within 5 years, and then which gives you more pay, and the incentive, if you get a rank 1 certificate, which is 30 hours beyond, you get more pay. I would be more inclined, by the way, not to think it in terms of the continuing professional development and the incentives and reward is tied to the sort of another 30 hours, of that structure. And that we need something else that provides incentives to engage in the study. And you got to think about time costs money. There's a limited amount of people, how much people will into, because they have other obligations. You got families, Somehow that's got to be part of the financial support for the education enterprise. I mean long-term. I mean, what about a summer institute every other year for 2 weeks or 3 weeks for everybody at half pay? I made that up too, right on the spot.
Let me make two suggestions. The one is that it seems to me, and it has seemed to me for years, that the pay structures of K through 12 should be like the pay structures of university, and that means merit pay. I don't understand why it can't work in K through 12. It works in universities all over the United States. Mm-hmm. The second thing is, what about a sabbatical for all workers in Kentucky? You work 7 years, you get entitled, for working 7 years, to a free year of tuition at any public university in Kentucky, or the equivalent thereof in dollars to any private institution, so that you can go on and renew yourself. That doesn't mean you take a year off and you go study. You could, but you could also use that course by course over the next 7 years. And when I say for people who work in Kentucky, I include homemakers. But what about that? If it's good for people in a knowledge industry, higher education, for instance, as we move into information-driven industries, wouldn't it be good for everybody, including public school teachers? I didn't just make that up. I've been pushing that for 20 years. But
I got one more fact, which is not the opinion is I think it's a good project program going on, but it's under the really coming out of the leadership of the General Assembly, they call for the development of a pilot program this year, next year on what's called a professional compensation plan. That, unless you know the code words, that doesn't mean anything. So we all have our own jargon. But it really is a project that involves the Department of Education and a advisory group involving the professional associations. That it's 6 school systems applied, and it's the district right outside of Louisville, one of the county school systems. And they've got a project to look at other ways of compensating teachers especially for continuing professional development. Now, whether that's going to lead to a better way to do what this question talked about, we don't know yet, but it's in the right territory, and I'm optimistic that it'll address that.
I'm Rose Marie Gold. I direct the Clearinghouse for School Services and Certification Office at the university, and I'm a member of the steering committee. Dr. Cody, a question from the audience for you. What specifically in coursework do you think would help pre-service teachers learn technology?
I not only have no facts or knowledge in this area, I'll have to think about it more carefully, and I won't ask you to rephrase the question because it was real clear. I don't think I can answer in terms of specific coursework. There are 2 ideas that are being discussed, and one of them I sort of it wasn't mine, but I just championed it. Was that the technology skill and the preparation of teachers and changing that in terms of what's happening now so that teachers are better prepared once they start. We need to work together on that. I mean, in terms of what's happening in some of the schools, the experts, let me put it this way, there are a lot of experts in the classrooms of Kentucky's elementary and middle schools and high schools who know how to use technology as part of the instructional program. I'm not talking about just word processing. I mean, it's an integral part. And there's some talent and resources there that somehow we need to work together. The other idea being discussed is that the Standards Board develop, and it's only an idea I think right now, a very specific requirement for certification of demonstrated proficiency. That has been done by other states. Whether one is enamored of that idea or not, it seems to work, is what it amounts to. So we are likely to see coming out of the Standards Board some, I don't know what the measurement might be. I don't even know how it would be measured, I mean, other people may be involved in that kind of conversation, but I'm not. But some way, and so that there is, quote, part of the certification. But that's the way, at least Standards Board, as terms of policies and what their scope of how they can deal with things, that's what they deal with, certification requirements and program requirements. But those two, the certification of teachers and some kind of demonstrated proficiency, and a joint venture in which we work together, I think at least two constructive ways of trying to answer that question.
This is primarily, I think, to Dr. Davies again. With the current shortage of qualified teachers, why were minors eliminated as an option for certification? Completion of 2 majors extends a student's education commitment typically by 1 year.
Well, no, I don't think that's to me, because I didn't eliminate minors, and I didn't even know minors were eliminated.
You have to be 16 years of age.
You have to be 16, right, or it's 3.2 all the way. Well, I don't know the answer to that, because I don't know anything about minors being eliminated, and Bill,
Ask it
you
again,
might.
would you? Because I think I understand what you're talking about.
With the current shortage of qualified teachers, why were minors eliminated as an option for certification?
Well, in answer to the specific question, why were minors eliminated? I don't know the answer to that either. But let me comment on the issue. I mean, one is a presumption of a shortage, and in fact, there are 1% of the teachers this year in Kentucky have emergency certificates. Okay, half of them are in special ed positions. Okay, so the big quote shortage problem is in special ed, and it is situation based, locale. I mean, some areas of the state got more, some don't have enough. Is what it amounts to. One of the ideas that a number of folks have been talking about is, well, I need to be honest, one I'm pushing, okay, is that you deal with the real shortage area by making the position more attractive. And there's more to it than just more pay, by the way. I mean, it's working conditions, a lot of other things, but making the going into teaching more attractive. And then you also look at when young people are at the time of making decisions, career decisions, and make becoming a teacher financially more attractive than studying anything else. Okay. Probably the least expensive way to increase the number of people certified for teaching is that when they're college freshmen or sophomores and are looking around trying to decide what they're going to do with the rest of their lives, discover that that they'll get more financial aid if they become a teacher than anything else they choose to study. And we found this works already in some small programs in other areas. We've had a tremendous effect in this state by a tuition program for minority educators. And there may be some other things, but there's ways of influencing this quote, what I call the numbers thing. And the other one is they're there, but they're in the wrong place. They don't live in the right place. Most major cities and most university towns have a quote surplus. I mean, everybody when they go to college, they would love to live in I had Chapel Hill, North Carolina. It was, the university was far bigger than the school system, and we had like 15 to 20, 25 applicants for every position. 100 miles away, they had a teacher shortage. Well, how do you do that? You get people to move. How do you do it? Well, you offer them incentives. You pay them another couple of $1,000 as a bonus pay to move. You pay moving costs, which is not a common practice. All I'm saying is when you look at this particular problem, more dimensions of it have got to be examined that, oh my gosh, we got a shortage, let's produce more. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And for instance, I haven't looked at current statistics. I remember 10 years ago I was on a National Academy Commission on Teacher Supply and Demand and Quality, and was kind of astounded by the numbers then, which was of all teachers who get certificates and or complete teacher training programs, only about 2/3 of them actually go into education. And of those that go into education 3 years later, only about 2/3 of them are still there. You know, maybe we ought to address this shortage differently than just say, let's have bigger programs and have more graduates. I mean, there's some, I guess from an employer's point of view, I'd love to have a big choice. I'd love to have 15, 20 applicants for every job. But that's, as a public policy, that's an awful way to do business, is what it amounts to. So, comments on the subject. I'm still not sure I answered the question, but anyway, comments on the topic.
Dr. Cody, you talked about high school graduation requirements during your remarks. And Dr. Davies, you opened the door to the Commonwealth Virtual University. So both of you may have remarks about this question. In light of today's technology, the Commonwealth Virtual University and the Commonwealth Virtual Library, should students be required to take a course in information literacy?
Yeah, I do. I think it's enormously important. And I want to come back to a question about training teachers in technology, because I think the two are tied. At the heart, it seems to me, of the liberal arts, at the heart of the liberal arts is communication and the ability to manipulate information. And the modern technologies, communications technologies and computing technologies, are now redefining our capacities to communicate and to manipulate information. That calls, in my mind, for a redefinition of the liberal arts and sciences in American higher education. The responsibility to turn out whatever we mean by the term technologically literate or capable teachers is not primarily a responsibility, in my judgment, of the schools of education. It is a responsibility of the entire university to turn out every single graduate of the university competent in communications and information manipulation using the most sophisticated means at our disposal. So, should we have courses in technology training and the ability to use the information that is available to us over the internet and so on? Yes, and in fact the Commonwealth Virtual Library is planning to develop online courses to help students separate the good from the bad on the net. And Prime Minister Macmillan once told a group of students at Oxford, he said, the primary purpose of what you're doing here at Oxford is when you go down to London, you will know who is talking rot. Well, the modern analog of that is you go web browsing and you've got to know the junk from the good stuff, and that is an essential ingredient of being a liberally educated human being.
Just a quick comment. I mean, my technological literacy is that for a year I could get email, but I've learned how to answer it now, and that's
That explains why you.
and my staff is really nervous because they're afraid I'm going to start learning how to send it, and that's what. But let me. I mean, I think, and I would really want to support what Gordon has said, that it is a communications issue. And the use of technology as far as communications in all forms, and I don't mean just the two-way sending messages, I'm talking about as a tool for not only for work production and communications, but learning, gathering information. It's kind of like it's the new basic skills. I keep wanting to think up an acronym for reading, writing, arithmetic, and technology, and I can't get it to spell anything. But it really is a new basic skill. I'm a little bit leery of those who want to say, let's create another course. Yeah. And I'm really picking up what he's saying. Yeah. I mean, I got a letter, I guess, several months ago from, I don't know who it was, saying that we were talking about high school graduation requirements, and was urging that we create a new course requiring all students to take a course in technology, and he spelled out what he thought all students coming out of high school ought to know. And I looked at it and I said, we're expecting in Kentucky to get that accomplished before they leave elementary school. And there's a lot more to it than that. Now, it was a helpful trying to be constructive. But let's be careful about courses. When it needs to be an integral part of of the work of all teachers. Now, having said that, we still, until we get to that, we still can probably have more courses somewhere.
Let's leave on that note. Dr. Davies, Dr. Cody, thank you for being with us today. We invite all of you to come back Friday, February the 19th, 2 weeks from today, at the same time when Dr. Robert Sexton of the Pritchard Committee will be our presenter. I bid you good evening from Morehead State University.